Hey, welcome to Friday night's video. Tonight we are going to talk about loudness, and we're going to talk about dynamics. This is a huge problem in the industry. They went for a while that it really wasn't that big a deal, and they addressed it some for quite a long time, but it really wasn't addressed that much, and it really wasn't, something that it wasn't a problem. And then came the loudness wars. And the loudness wars just basically came to, really trying to just get it as loud as possible. And they were really just, not worrying so much about dynamics. And that had a lot to do with the type of music also. Good music's got good dynamics. Does that make sense? Which is true, and sometimes it isn't, because I've got some heavy metal songs that I love that there's no dynamics in that song at all. I mean, it's just pounding all the time. I got that file. It looks like somebody squished it in a trash compactor, and it sounds great, dude. I love it. So the concept of dealing with loudness, there's a couple different things. An audiophile, if we listen to all these different levels, that you have in the loudness of your production, and really be listening for it and really be appreciative of it. And, that's a different situation to Bob, who just wants it at a constant volume while he's doing dishes, doing housework, working in the office, or, out at the construction site, or while he's doing his hobbies or whatever, that he's not really focused on your music. It's just kind of background. He likes the music and he's showing this album, but, it's really, he wants background music. It's not as much as he's going to sit down, with his $10,000 stereo this afternoon, and he's going to spend an hour or two listening to your production. Yeah, dude, you sit down, crack a beer, and just do nothing but sit there and listen to your production. There's a couple different situations where your production might be into, and sometimes both what can cause a problem. So, really wanting those dynamics because they're beautiful, and wanting to squish it so it's comparable to Bob's and it's just loud as possible so you get heard, that Bob's music gets played and then your production comes on and they don't listen to it. There's been studies that say when people hear music louder than something else, that the majority of them would come to the understanding that the louder music is better because they don't have to work as hard as listening to what's going on, which is sad but can be true. So the issue is both sides and their arguments are correct. The argument is where's the environment that your production would get played. So that's very hard to know. But you can go and say, okay, go to these streaming services or whatever and know, or, buy the CDs. How much dynamics is this genre really letting happen in their production? Or how much dynamics and where the loudness is happening when they're streaming these productions. And you kind of want to be comparable to them, whether or not that's right or wrong, until, the mainstream changes. If the guy you're working for, his stuff is going to be heard as well and be comparable and not so different to where it gets ignored. Does that make sense? Because you got one song and he's got it crushed, and then your song's really quiet, and then the next song comes in real loud, that, they're not going to run over and turn your stuff up, because there's a huge concept that, to really hear good dynamics, you just got to turn this stuff up. So this big loudness war basically boiled down to, listen, bro, turn it up. We want the dynamics in the music. There's going to be this quiet spot. There's going to be this kind of a little bit louder, a little bit louder, a little bit louder, loud spot. So we've got these really cool dynamics. It's really part of a really good production. And so you're just going to turn the music up. You're going to turn the volume up so you can hear the quiet parts and the medium parts and the loud parts, dude. And it's part of the production. Does that make sense? But that's up to the listener. You have to turn it up so that you can hear what's going on. And that's a huge concept. And as that develops more, that you'll have more freedom to really incorporate more dynamics. But until that happens, you really got to go to where it's going and make your stuff comparable. I always make an audiophile version with great dynamics first, and I save that, and then I take the original and I squish it as much as it needs to be comparable on the streaming service with the other like genre or the like CDs of those genres as best I can, because they'll expect that, because they're accepting that. And as they accept that you got to be comparable until they don't accept that, and then you can go ahead and add more dynamics and not worry about so much. So that basically ends that argument, okay? So for you, so you don't get so wrapped up on it. The biggest thing is you understand loudness. What is loudness? What exactly does that mean? And then you go to leveling systems and understand, you know, even a simple example is why for this section is this guy really worried about what the peak is, and why is he really paying attention why the peak is there so he can use a compressor or a limiter. He's really worried about what the peak, you know, level is there. And then why is he all of a sudden going to LFUFS, and why is he really worried about what the LFUFS is there for that section? You know, why is that? Because he's worried about it going, well, as it's flowing along streaming, this is what they consider comparable, or in his production that, you know, it's going along and he's listening to it, and he's also watching on his LUFS to watch the dynamic changes that are happening, the median levels and the peak levels, to see how much change is happening there, listen to it and see it, to where he's hearing it, but he's also visualizing. You go, what, that doesn't sound quite right. What's my meter saying? You know, does that make sense? Because you can't really, you rely on both, you know, does that make sense? And when you get to that point and you really understand that, the other loudness factor is the equal loudness contour. There's a video on this channel about why you boost the bass up, why you boost it up around 10K, why it's boosted around here, and why it's dropped down around this area, so that your ear hears it all at the same level, like the volume's the same level, that, you know, you have to turn the bass way up here for it to sound like it's the same level as the frequencies in this area. That's a really simple concept. Does that make sense? So when you get into production, that you understand, you're looking at this transient here, which is a kick drum, that it's boosted way up, and it's like, I need to put a compressor on it, but it doesn't sound out of whack with the production, what's happening in production with these other frequencies that are around it. It's supposed to stand out, or it's not supposed to stand out that much, or it's blending well because of you've taken all those things into consideration while you're mixing each different section. Because I'll do each track separate, and as I go through it, I'll listen to the whole production, and then I'll go back to that section and say, what are the dynamics supposed to be happening in the vocal there? And then I'll listen to it in context with the rest of the production before I've really worked on it, as I go one track at a time, to really see what I need to work on with my dynamics. And then after I get done, you've seen the flow editing, and then really working on, you know, how much I need to compress it, and then expand it after I've done my processing to it, because I will maximize every track that I have nowadays, because I love it. Because now I can get everything, I can normalize it to where this track is loud as it can be, as loud as I want it, and I can retain dynamics as much as I want, and it does a beautiful job of it without me having to mess with my limiters and my compressors, or 2 or 3 compressors and side chain to try to get this thing. Does that make sense? Because it can be complicated. But if you do really good work on these first steps, that, you know, maximizer are an awesome tool just to get a good maximized sound. If I want it quieter in the mix, I'll turn it down, and later on, if I decide, well, no, this area here, it needs to get boosted in the automation a little bit right there, I can always go back and automate that a little bit louder, not a big deal, or quieter, or whatever. So, and it doesn't take that much. So this concept of really worrying about, you know, what's happening there, and really understanding that, so that you can really address your dynamics and the loudness issue well, and in context of what you're producing for, who you're producing for, where it's going, and, you know, being able to do it well for that production. Does that make sense? And really, I'm being able to understand when squishing the heck out of something is a good idea and when it's not. Because in both those things, there's been, I'll get some stuff, I'll squish the crap out of it. It sounds great. Yeah, dude, just like that. You know, and it's like, and sometimes, no, don't touch that. You can't mess with those dynamics. You can't be squishing that at all. You better mess with volume automation a little bit, to fuss with that a little bit. You might be able to put a compressor on a little bit. And you might have to go and do some flow editing on it, like we talked in the last video, to really avoid compressing it in any way, shape, or form. And those are huge concepts to get into understanding, and that each individual track you're dealing with the loudness, well, how it should be, going up or down or wherever, for each individual section on that track, and then comparing it, listening to it together with the rest of the mix, you know, every now and then to see, well, yeah, and then so that it should be a little bit quieter there, you know, and then so you turn to, you know, dealing with each track like that to really get the dynamics done well. You know, picking something that's going to be sometimes it's hard to choose like a vocal or any instrument to really have that set the pace of where the dynamic should be, because if there's a lot of different sections going on, a lot of different types of movements and transitions and things like that, that it's really hard to have one instrument, lead it. Like, the drummer leading the bass player. It just sometimes just doesn't work that way. And you just got to take each section at a time and deal with their dynamics, and then listen to the overall production together if it flows together. Because if you look at the flow editing video I talked about in the last video, it's the same thing. You got this section here that's going to this section here, and that in that one track, the flow editing is the dynamics working away. And does that work well? And all the other instruments in that section doing what they should be doing as far as their dynamics. And really spending the time, sometimes it's just slight adjustments, just not much at all, doing it here or the Vader or wherever, that those little teeny adjustments, I just make it. Does that make sense? To where when you get done, you're really not using a compressor a lot and have to worry about a lot of that stuff. You just want to get it as loud as possible and retain as much dynamics as you want for the production, which maximizers are great for. So, and then you can really, target, where you want your peaks and where you want your LUFS and things like that for wherever it's being streamed, what's comparable and what's acceptable and what's normal that's being produced in that genre or that musical form or whatever, and try to get it set for that, how do you say what's acceptable at this time? It's like they're having a loudness war. Squish it, bro. We're freaking out and they want more dynamics and they're throwing the loudness war out. That means you can back off. Try to see what the hell how much did they back off on the loudness war? I mean, what are they really doing? What are they really doing that the people are buying right now? And you gotta kind of follow that as to make your decisions when you go ahead and master something and mix something of what you're going to do to produce it as well as you can for who you're producing it for, so that they can package it and send it out there that is comparable to Bob and Randy and Ralph's stuff. As far as the loudness, the peaks, the LUFS, and all that kind of stuff that's happening, and the dynamics in the song, how much is acceptable, at this point in time with what, the general public are accepting. Which sometimes you don't have to worry about that if you're some kind of underground or you're pedophile, or not pedophile, audiophile, sorry. Anyway, so the concept is really simple. Try to keep it that simple in your head and really deal with it that way. And you'll really find that you really don't pay attention to that much. You will not get in that argument. You will not get yourself wrapped in that, putting that too much. And you'll spend more time going, well, if it's an issue, what is the general public listening to? That means you go listen to them streaming it on Pandora or Spotify or whatever, and you start picking some songs from that genre or from this and that genre and go, so they're all basically, I've run into my DAW and I'm looking at the loudest meter. What is it going to? That's basically where they're running, how much dynamics they're accepting. That's about how much, they're, where their medians and their levels and how much they've squished it and And that whatever they say, that's what they're producing right now. So you want to be comparable to that and not worry about what the damn argument is. Because when they get it pushed through, then you can make adjustments, and change yourself. Which is great to keep up on it, but don't get your head wrapped up on it too much, because these are the basic concepts that you should keep in your head when that issue arises, or you're worried about the dynamics in your song, how much you can squish it, if you should squish it, when you do either way, that or somewhere in between, what you can get away with for the production you're working on and who you're working with and what type of music you're working in. So really keep that in mind and think about that a little bit, because it will definitely cause you to mix a little bit different, so that as you start to do your editing and your flow processing, your first phase processing and your compressing and your maximizing, and then you start mixing, it'll really make you kind of look at it a little bit differently, and you'll start to get a workflow going that really takes that in consideration, so that you don't sit around and get wrapped up and you go, no, I know that'd be like that. I know where it's going. I know it needs to be like that. And bam, 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 bam. And off you go, rather than get wrapped up in that kind of crap. So, I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you in the next video, and I certainly hope that I answered that question about loudness for you, so that I try to break it down to as simple a concept as possible, so that all that technical stuff going on is nowhere near as important has those basic things that we've talked about here, and to understand that, really think about it and really apply it to your mix, to where it's going, you know, and what you need to do and what you want to do and what your producers want you to do and what the general public wants you to do for that type of production that you're working on. So peace, up, love. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you in the next video next Friday night.